Today, imagine this. You are a woman with remarkable talent, bursting with ideas to write stories, essays, or even poetry. But every door to opportunity is locked. You cannot attend a university, enter a library without special permission, or even keep the money you earn as it belongs to your father or your husband. Then, how would you create? Virginia Woolf begins A Room of One's Own with this stark reality. She frames her argument in one simple but revolutionary statement. A woman must have money and a room of her own if she is to write fiction. But why money and a room? Because without financial independence or personal space, creative work is nearly impossible. Take, for example, the real-life stories of women who had to hide behind male pseudonyms. Marianne Evans became George Eliot to ensure her novels were treated seriously. Similarly, Charlotte Bronte published Jane Eyre under the name Currer Bell to avoid gender prejudice. Even later, in the 20th century, J.K. Rowling used her initials because her publishers feared boys wouldn't read books written by a woman. These examples show that Woolf's concerns were not limited to her own time. They resonate even today. Woolf's A Room of One's Own explores not just the material conditions needed for creativity, but also the psychological and societal barriers that have historically silenced women. Her work is not merely a historical critique, but a call to action for readers to imagine a better world for women and creativity. Now we would focus on the themes Woolf has focused on. The first one is woman and fiction. Woolf begins by unpacking what woman and fiction really means. Is it about women as writers? Women as characters in fiction? Or the way women have been imagined by male authors? Woolf says it is all of these. But instead of giving a straightforward answer, she invites readers to follow her thought process. To illustrate women's exclusion, Woolf describes her experiences at Oxford and Cambridge University. She gives a fictional name, Oxbridge. While walking on the grass at the university, she was stopped by a beetle, which is a symbolic gatekeeper of male privilege. This is not just about grass. It is a metaphor for how women have been excluded from intellectual spaces. She is further denied entry to the library because she doesn't have a male companion or a letter of introduction. Woolf's point is very clear. Women were literally locked out of places where knowledge was created and shared. Now let's connect this to real life. Imagine a modern office where women are excluded from important meetings because of unconscious biases, or a film industry that historically kept women out of directing roles. These are contemporary echoes of the barriers Woolf describes. Woolf also points to the way women have been portrayed in literature. Male authors often reduced female characters to stereotypes. The angelic wife, the seductive temptress, or the tragic victim. These portrayals were not just limiting, they shaped how society viewed women. Therefore, Woolf's critique forces us to ask, how do stories shape the roles we expect women to play in real life? The next point is historical exclusion of women. Woolf critiques the narrow and patriarchal lens of history by referring to Trevelyan's history book. While flipping through its pages, Woolf notes the glaring absence of women's achievements and the prominence of domestic oppression. She writes, and I'll read it: "Wife beating, it was said, was a recognized right of man and was practiced without shame by high as well as low." Trevelyan's history paints a grim picture of women's lives marked by forced marriages, domestic violence, and exclusion from intellectual and cultural life. Yet it fails to acknowledge how these conditions stifled women's creativity and agency. Woolf remarks that while these injustices are noted in passing, the contributions of women to society through art, literature, or even resistance are entirely ignored. For example, while history books celebrate Elizabethan England as Shakespeare's golden age, they rarely mention the countless women whose labor, silence, and sacrifices underpinned that society. Woolf's critique of Trevelyan reminds us that history, as written by men, has often erased women's voices, reducing them to the margins. The next point is representation of women in fiction versus reality. Woolf observes that women in fiction are often depicted as larger-than-life figures: queens, witches, lovers, or muses, while real women lived lives of drudgery and constraints. She writes, "In fiction, they have served as mirrors to the virtues and vices of men. In reality, they lived in cottages, excluded from educated and public life." Take Shakespeare's heroines as an example. Portia in The Merchant of Venice is witty, resourceful, and commands the courtroom in disguise. Lady Macbeth in Macbeth is ambitious and manipulative. She influences her husband to commit regicide. These fictional women are powerful and complex, yet they bear no resemblance to the lives of actual women in the Elizabethan period. Real women of Shakespeare's time were denied education and legal rights, married off for family alliances, and subjected to patriarchal control. Woolf's point resonates even today. In media, women are often portrayed as either idealized figures or villains, while their real struggles, that is, inequality, domestic abuse, workplace harassments, are underrepresented or ignored. Woolf challenges this dichotomy, calling for literature that reflects the genuine experiences and potentials of women. Woolf introduces a thoughtful experiment to illustrate the systematic barriers faced by women. She imagines that Shakespeare had a sister named Judith, who is equally brilliant and creative. While William Shakespeare attends grammar school, writes plays, and rises to fame, Judith's life takes a different course. Judith is denied education because it was not considered necessary for women. She is ridiculed for ambition, forbidden to leave home, and eventually forced into an unwanted marriage. Desperate to escape, she runs away to London only to be mocked, exploited, and ultimately driven to despair. Woolf concludes that she died young, and she never wrote a word. This comparison demonstrates how societal structure and not talent determine who achieves greatness. Shakespeare's success was not just due to his genius, but also to the opportunities available to him as a man. Judith Shakespeare, equally gifted, is silenced by a patriarchal system that denies her the education, independence, and audience her brother takes for granted. This thought experiment is not just merely historical. It echoes in today's world. Consider how many women still struggle to balance careers and caregiving, or how women in certain parts of the world are denied education altogether. Virginia Woolf's Judith Shakespeare reminds us of the untold stories of countless women whose potential has been stifled by systematic inequality. Woolf's historical analysis focuses on how women's exclusion from education, financial independence, and public life has stifled their creativity. She imagines Shakespeare's fictional sister, Judith. Judith has the same genius as her brother, but because she is a woman, her life takes a tragically different course. Denied education, mocked for her ambition, and pressured into marriage, Judith's talent is never realized. And therefore, Woolf writes, she died young. Alas, she never wrote a word. This fictional story reflects real historical barriers. Woolf cites prominent men like Oscar Browning, a Cambridge professor who once claimed that the best woman is intellectually inferior to the worst man. These attitudes were not just offensive, they had real consequences. Women's works were dismissed as sentimental or lacking intellectual depth, no matter their quality. Take the example of Charlotte Bronte. When she submitted her poetry under her own name, she received condescending feedback. Her publisher told her that women were better suited to writing about home and hearth than exploring complex themes. This was the reality for many women who were told that their creative work was inherently inferior because of their gender. Woolf argues that even when women overcame these barriers and wrote, they faced enormous psychological pressure. She highlights how the lack of female predecessors created a sense of isolation. Woolf writes that for most of history, Anonymous was a woman. To simplify this, countless women wrote, but their names were erased or their works were attributed to men. Woolf points out that much of the creative work throughout history, whether songs or poems or stories, was attributed to Anonymous. She provocatively asserts for most of history Anonymous was a woman. Why? Because women denied education, independence, and recognition often had to hide their identities to contribute to art and culture. Consider traditional ballads or folk songs. Many of these were likely composed by women, reflecting their lived experiences, but their authorship remains unnamed. For instance, nursery rhymes and lullabies passed down generations often emerged from women's domestic spaces. Yet, society deemed their contributions insignificant for attribution. Woolf's observation highlights how women were systematically silenced. Even when they wrote, they did so anonymously to avoid societal judgment or because their work was not considered worthy of a name. Contrast this with the treatment of men like Chaucer or Shakespeare, whose works were immediately celebrated and preserved under their names. The next point is the importance of money and space. Woolf's central argument revolves around two necessities for creativity. The first one is financial independence, and the second one is personal space. She recounts her own experience of inheriting £500 a year from her aunt. This inheritance liberated her. She says, "The money I own seemed infinitely the more important." But why? Because it liberated her from daily struggle of earning a living and allowed her to focus on writing. To illustrate the impact of poverty, Woolf contrasts two meals, one at the wealthy Oxbridge and another at the struggling Fernham. Fernham is again a fictional women's college. At Oxbridge, the meal includes partridge, fine wine, and rich desserts. At Fernham, it's plain gravy soup and prunes. Woolf uses this disparity to highlight how women's colleges, underfunded for centuries, lacked the resources to nurture intellectual growth. She writes, "One cannot think well, love well, sleep well if one has not dined well. Think about the practical implications of this today. A young writer who works 3 part-time jobs to make ends meet won't have the time or energy to create. Similarly, a single mother juggling childcare and work may find her creative aspirations slipping away. Woolf's argument is not just about luxury, it is about the basic resources needed to foster creativity. The next point is gendered expectations and psychological barriers. Woolf introduces the concept of the angel in the house, a metaphor for the societal expectation that women be self-sacrificing and devoted to others. She writes, "She was intensely sympathetic, she was immensely charming, she excelled in the difficult arts of family life." Woolf explains that she had to kill his angel to write freely because the expectations of being agreeable stifled her creativity. This connected to the psychological impact of constant belittlement. Woolf describes how male writers often depicted women with anger or condescension. Men like Napoleon Bonaparte or Mussolini insisted on women's inferiority to maintain their own sense of superiority. Woolf uses the metaphor of women as looking glasses to describe how men used women to reflect their own egos. She writes, "Women have served all these centuries as looking glasses, possessing the power of reflecting the figure of man at twice its natural size." Consider the modern implications. Even today, women in leadership roles are often criticized for being too assertive or too emotional. These criticisms echo the psychological barriers Woolf identifies. Breaking free from these expectations required not just individual effort, but systematic change. Woolf ends on a hopeful note. She advocates for an androgynous mind, one that transcends gender and focuses solely on ideas. She writes, "It is fatal for anyone who writes to think of their sex." This idea is not just about erasing gender. It is about freeing creativity from societal expectations. Woolf points to writers like Jane Austen and George Eliot who succeeded despite immense barriers. She challenges future generations to build on their legacy and create a world where creativity is not limited by gender. Today we see glimpses of this future. Women like Arundhati Roy have written groundbreaking works that challenge societal norms. Woolf's vision reminds us that progress is possible, but it requires continuous effort. Lastly, I would like to end this by saying that Woolf's A Room of One's Own is not just a historical critique. It is a call to reimagine society. Woolf shows us that creativity is not just about talent, it is about opportunity. Women need financial independence, personal space, and freedom from societal expectations to thrive. Her work resonates today as we continue to challenge barriers to equality in education, work, and creative fields. Woolf's message is simple but very profound. To create a truly equitable world, we must ensure that no voice is silenced due to poverty, prejudice, or exclusion. With this, I end Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own. If you think that this video has helped you in any way or the other, do like, comment, share, and subscribe to my channel. Thank you.